Welcome to the New Energy Events Series. My name's Mike Bennett, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Stephanie Leishman, Training Advisor, Training Services New South Wales, Central and Northern Sydney. So welcome, Steph.
Hello.
So, Steph, can you tell us about the role of Training Services New South Wales in relation to apprenticeships and traineeships in New South Wales?
I can. So training services, we're the regulators for apprenticeships and traineeships in New South Wales. So what our role is to administer the Apprenticeship and Traineeship Act. And part of that is in approving training contracts, varying training contracts, and issuing the certificate of proficiency on successful completion of the apprenticeship or traineeship. Day to day, our role involves supporting and guiding employers, learners, training providers, to ensure that there is that successful completion in training. Training services also manage the smart and skilled contracts to ensure that quality education system in New South Wales. And smart and skilled providers are funded to deliver approximately 90% of all apprenticeships and traineeships in New South Wales. So big role for us. As a training advisor, my job is to go out into the field and meet with employers and learners and training providers to make sure that everyone's supported and know what their obligations are under the training contract. I reiterate those training plan requirements. That's a key part of the apprenticeship and traineeship process. And because training services fund most of those apprenticeships and traineeships, I also get notified by RTOs when things aren't going right. So my job is to provide advice and support depending on that particular situation.
Okay. So as well as all of that, the department coordinates free workshops on supervising apprentices and trainees. So what are the key messages that employers take away from those workshops?
Yeah, so the workshop is something that I get to facilitate out of our Central and Northern Sydney office. But the workshop follows the training contract process all the way from sign up all the way to the completion of the contract. We really want to highlight with employers and supervisors what to expect throughout that process and what those legal and key requirements are. It's not just cheap labour taking on an apprentice or trainee. There's a bit of work that goes into it. So the modules are roles and expectations. So key messages participants take away from that particular module is who's who in the zoo, essentially. The whole apprenticeship space has quite a few key players in there.
Yeah.
And then we deep dive into the role of the learner or the apprentice or trainee and the key roles of the supervisor. We also touch on physical and psychological safety and how to create an environment where learning can occur in a safe and supportive environment. We also go through inclusion and development strategies. That's where we talk about those coaching and mentoring strategies because everyone comes from a different walk of life. We also go into the training plan, and the key message here is that the training plan is an essential part of that training contract. And we show participants or supervisors how to utilize that training plan in the day-to-day business or day-to-day supporting of their learner. And then the competency and completion. So there's a couple of different ways to complete a training contract and understanding what competency actually means.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that a little bit. You talked about the roles and responsibilities. What are the roles and responsibilities of the apprentice or trainee in the employment relationships?
Yeah, so this is one of the first activities we dive into in the workshop. We get participants to think about what their ideal candidate looks like or flip what their worst candidate looks like. But by signing the training contract, learners are agreeing to make every effort to successfully undertake the skills and knowledge of that vocation, and that they're going to complete their qualifications. So to do this, learners need to follow all employers' instructions, safe and lawful instructions. They're bound by the Apprenticeship Act and the training plan and their training contract, but they're also bound by their company policies and procedures. So making sure they're understanding when they need to submit timesheets, how to appropriately notify leave, party shirts on Fridays, whatever it is. They've got to follow those company policies and procedures. The learners also have to contribute to a safe and supportive environment. It's not all just the employer's job or the supervisor's job. So, and also part of that is undertaking their formal training. That's a requirement of the apprenticeship or traineeship. So they need to utilise their release time that employers are providing them. So it's not like they're just sitting there on their phone going through or sitting in there on their phone while the teacher's talking at them. They're actually getting through the coursework and participating. Learners also need to show that they're progressively understanding their skills or making progress towards the whole competency of that vocation. So, for example, like a first year would start to identify the tools that they need on job sites. The second year, they're learning how to use those particular tools, but by third year and fourth year, they know which tool does which job for which particular task.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. So you touched on the training plan. So what role does the training plan have in the apprenticeship arrangement?
So I wish we can pause here. Sorry, I wish as an employer I knew how good the training plan was. We can cut that part out.
Yeah, so we'll have that edited out. All good.
Oh, sorry.
All right. All right. So do you want me to ask you again?
Is that how it works?
Yeah. So we'll pick up. So you touched on the training plan. So what role does the training plan play in the apprenticeship employment arrangement?
Yeah, so every apprentice or trainee gets a training plan when they sign into a training contract. It's a legal requirement under the Apprenticeship and Traineeship Act, but basically it outlines every unit of competency that the learner will undertake throughout their apprenticeship or traineeship, and it describes the formal and on-the-job training and the skills that are required for them to obtain that qualification. An employer has a really important role in that training plan. It's not just something that they should be signing and forgetting about and leaving it to the training provider to do that formal training. But then, so the employer needs to provide an on-the-job training experience for each of those units of competency and progressively signing off on that training plan. So basically that means an employer has a role to create an environment, not only that does that learning occur in a safe and supportive environment, but they're motivated to teach their learner about what the skills are in that vocation and provide that constructive and positive feedback throughout the course of the apprenticeship. And there are legal requirements, not a government department without those legal requirements. So the RTOs, the training provider, the employer and the learner all need to agree on what that training plan looks like. And that training plan has defined roles for each participant. And then, yeah, making sure that they're getting through that qualification.
And there's a few players in the apprenticeship relationship. So what role does the Apprentice Connect Australia provider play?
Cool. You keep changing your names, guys. So we've referred to them at training services as apprentice providers.
Yep.
So if you want to become an apprentice or if you want to hire an apprentice or a trainee, your apprentice provider are the first point of contact to get started. So they connect apprentices and trainees with employers and they support all parties throughout the course of that training contract. Their role is free and it's an essential requirement. I can't come out and sign into the training contract. That's what your apprenticeship provider's role is. They will advise on any incentives that may be entitled to for an employer or for a learner, and they can also suggest any training delivery options or any requirements that come through for being an apprentice or a trainee. Your apprenticeship provider signs you into your training contract and signs a training plan proposal document. That's basically your booking sheet to your training provider. And then they lodge it with training services. And training services work really closely with all of our apprenticeship providers to make sure that all of the guidelines and policies and procedures are followed. So if we need further information when we're assessing a training contract, we generally reach out to your apprenticeship provider to obtain that for us on your behalf.
Okay. So circling back to the workshop, so what are some of the tips that you give on effective supervision and coaching?
Yep. So everyone has their own unique life experiences and their own unique skills that they bring to a team. It's important that we encourage employers to think of everyone as on a case-by-case basis and build that rapport with their learner. So that ensures that you can tailor your coaching and supervision style to meet their needs so that you've got that successful completion at the end. We know if we can get them through their first year of their apprenticeship or traineeship, they're more likely to stay and then become that productive team member. So we know that learning isn't necessarily a linear process, so it's important to understand where your learner is at all times in terms of their understanding of job tasks and the skills. But we also want supervisors to consider the types of instructions they give. For someone, you might need to break that task into really step-by-step processes, whereas you might have someone who, understands things a little bit quicker or has experience, so you don't have to break it down step by step. In that way. There are some legal requirements, though, for supervision and of apprentices and trainees, and training services need to be satisfied that these are met. So we provide these workshops to ensure that supervisors are aware of their legal requirements. So some of the questions we ask employers, particularly at the sign-up process, is the level of supervision to ensure that it ensures that there's adequate health and safety processes in place. Is the level of supervision sufficient to provide that meaningful on-the-job training, particularly when they're completing those complex or high-risk activities? Is that level of supervision sufficient to adequately monitor the apprentice's progress throughout the course of their training contract? And is there someone who's responsible in the workplace who, other than the apprentice or trainee, who has the authority to deal with customer complaints? Because that can be quite confronting particularly for our younger learners. And on top of that, employers need to have the skills and knowledge in that vocation themselves. There's no point in me walking onto a job site and saying, yep, everything's okay, and deem someone competent because I don't have those skills or that experience myself. And then some vocations have licensing requirements. So your apprenticeship provider or your Australian Connect apprentice provider can advise on that information. But that's all outlined in our vocational training orders and our commissioner information bulletins. So yeah.
Okay. And the workshop also speaks to different learning styles for apprentices. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, everyone learns and interprets information differently, and this can change depending on the scenario or that job task or an environment. If your apprentice or trainee learns differently from you, how do you bridge that gap? So in the workshop, we dive into what it means to be a visual learner, an auditory learner, or a kinesthetic learner, so hands-on learner, and how to best present or instruct learners in these different areas. On top of those learning styles, we also have different communication styles that might change depending on particular scenarios. So it's important to understand if your learner is, a little bit more fragile or, likes to build those relationships, they're an amiable learner. If you're going in with a really direct approach, you might have some barriers there. So it's making sure you as a supervisor can tailor that approach for your learner. And then in that workshop, we go through different scenarios and we encourage employers to think about things that are very common in the workplace and how they would tailor that approach depending on what your learner's learning style is or their communication style would be.
So if there is additional supports required, where can an employer or an apprentice find those additional supports?
Yep, so there's heaps of support available. We don't want employers or learners to think that they're doing this alone, particularly if something's a bit unsure or a bit sticky. So on top of the supervisor workshops that we deliver, if your learner identifies as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, there's our Barangarra mentoring program available for your learner to participate in. All of our regional offices, there's 9 in the state, have identified staff members that can provide extra cultural support if that's what your learner needs or if you need that as an employer or a supervisor. If your learner has disclosed on the training contract that they have a disability, there's the Employment Assistance Fund that your apprenticeship provider can also provide any extra support with. It also triggers a little bit of extra support for the training organisation, whether or not your learner needs a scribe or an extra hour of release time, just depending on what it is. Training Services also has the Bert Evans Apprenticeship Scholarship for any apprentices who have experienced personal hardship. There is some eligibility criteria that applies. I think Training Services at the Central and Northern Regional Office, we've just administered 15 scholarships. So yeah, very, very successful program. And Training Services can also provide financial assistance for apprentices or new entrant trainees who have to travel more than 120 kilometres for the purposes of formal training to attend, like whether it's once a day or block release. And again, eligibility criteria apply. On top of that, you've got your apprenticeship provider that can advise can provide extra support on any of those training solutions that you might have, or if you need to upskill any of your staff. And then outside of Training Services, there's group training organisations, Fair Work, New South Wales Fair Training, your industry training advisory bodies and Safe Work. And then if you need some mental health support services, there's Beyond Blue, Lifeline and Headspace, just to name a few. I think what we kind of want to get out for employers is you don't have to do this alone.
Yeah.
Just give us a call, and if we don't have the answer, we'll definitely point you in that right direction.
Yeah, and obviously those supports, they're replicated across all jurisdictions, not just New South Wales. So you underscore the importance of work health and safety in the workshops, obviously. So what advice do you provide to supervisors and apprentices in respect to work health and safety?
Yeah, so that's one of the key requirements of an employer's obligation, is to ensure that learning occurs in that safe and supportive environment. Employers and supervisors have a duty of care. We know that I've got a stat, 36% of apprentices and trainees are under the age of 19. So on top of training services coming out and monitoring all under 18 contracts, we encourage supervisors to make safety part of that conversation, and manage and be aware of risks for both young and older apprentices and trainees, and match those job tasks with that learner's skill set.
Yeah.
We encourage supervisors to review their safety policies and procedures regularly and how they might apply to their apprentice or trainee. And then it's not just physical safety, there's psychological safety. So when we go through the workshop, the first module, all of the supervisors identify that they want to provide an environment where the learner can feel safe to come and ask them questions.
Yeah.
And we deep dive into how do we actually create an environment where it's psychological safety and mental health support is available to everyone.
Yeah, and a good proportion of the apprenticeship cohort are young people transitioning from school, so very new to the workplace, so obviously considered high risk.
Yeah,
so,
and they're not just learning those technical skills of the role, they're also learning those soft skills. So
yeah.
Employers are oftentimes a role model for how they're going to handle stress. So if you've got a supervisor that's a stressful situation and they're yelling and screaming about something, your learner's going to remember that and either take that on themselves or not raise things when they're concerned because they're worried that they're going to get their head bitten off. So, yeah.
So really, really helpful if people can get to attend the supervisors workshop. So where can people go to find out more information about attending or participating?
Yeah, so our website, I'm going to share a link. Actually, I might do that right now if you don't mind.
Sure.
So we have, if you want to jump behind me, let's see if this works. Is that popped up?
Yep. Perfect.
Excellent. If you want to use that QR code, it's going to take you to Training Services Linktree. And in there it has all of our supervisor workshop information. It has an employer guide if you want a little bit more information about that. As I mentioned, there's 9 regional offices all throughout New South Wales, so we can tailor this to industry if there's a cohort of industry requirements to be done, or if you're a large employer and you're looking to take on a couple of apprentices and you want to train your supervisors. I need to reiterate, it is free, because the goal is obviously to get those training contracts completed.
Well, Steph Leishman, Training Advisor for Training Services New South Wales, we appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you.